Okay, so good morning to everyone. Regarding the class test, right? So the syllabus for the class test, I was just going to present it anyway. So it's basically everything that we have covered between the last test, right, and before the break. So whatever we covered this week will not be part of the test. So this means that the syllabus will be context-free grammars, parse trees, normal forms for CFG, and push-down automata. Okay. Okay. So the class test is tomorrow, right? It's during the lecture slot, and this is the syllabus. Okay. So are there any more questions regarding the test? Okay. Thank you. Okay. So in the last lecture, right, we had just started this topic of pumping lemma for CFLs, right? So just like we covered the pumping lemma for regular languages, right? The goal of the pumping lemma is to prove that some language is not a CFL, right? So just like there are languages which are not regular, there are also languages which are not context-free languages, right? So we have seen sort of one example that I briefly mentioned during while covering the topic of push-down automaton, right? That this language of the form WW, right, where W belongs to 0, 1 star. So this language is not a context-free language. Right. And in fact, in today's lecture, we will show using the pumping lemma that it is not context-free. Right? But so that's the goal of a context. That's the goal of the pumping lemma. Right? And just to again revise the statement of the CFL pumping lemma. So the CFL pumping lemma says that if you take a context-free language L, then there exists some integer, right, some positive integer n, such that if you take every string z in L, whose length is greater than or equal to this n, right? Which means if you take a large enough string z in L, right, then there exists substrings of this z, right, which you can pump. Right? So in particular, this z can be broken down into some u, v, w, x, and y, right? So this u, v, w, x, and y are all substrings of z, right? So what are the constraints on this u, v, w, x, and y? Right? So there are two constraints. Right? So one is that the length of the middle part of this sequence of substrings, right? So which is this vwx. So the length of vwx must be less than or equal to n, and the second constraint is that if you take v and x, right, then both of them cannot be empty. So which means that the length of vx must be greater than 0. So if you can break down, so there exists some way in which you can break down z, right, in the form of this u, v, w, x, and y, which follows these two constraints, right? And then the two substrings v and x can be pumped in tandem as many times as you want, right? Which means that for all I greater than or equal to 0, u, v to the power I, w, x to the power I, y is in L, right? So we have basically pumped both v and x I number of times, right? Where I, you can also pump down, right? So which means I can also be 0, or it can be any positive integer, right? And the resulting string is still going to be in L, which means if you take a large enough substring in a large enough string in L, right, then I can generate an infinite set of strings, right, from that string, which would also be in L, right? So that's the statement of the CFL pumping lemma, right? So in today's lecture, we will first prove this pumping lemma, right? And then we will look at its contrapositive form. Then we will again, right, formulate this game with Demon in order to use this contrapositive form to prove that some language is not context-free. And then we will look at some examples of how to use this game, right, in order to prove that some language is not context-free. Okay, so that's the outline for today's lecture. Okay. Right. So let's briefly. So there was this question last time, right? That how does this particular pumping lemma compare with the pumping lemma for regular languages, right? So let's again take a look at the pumping lemma for regular languages, right? And in particular for this particular language, right? So this is the canonical non-regular language, which is the 0i 1i, where I is greater than or equal to 0. Right? So we know that this language is not regular, but it is context-free, right? Because you can easily generate. So we have seen grammars, right, and we've even seen push down automaton for this language. So let's again take a look at the statement for the pumping lemma for regular languages. So for regular languages, the pumping lemma said that if L is regular, then again there exists some integer n, right, such that for all strings x, y, and z, where the concatenation x, y, z belongs to L, and this length is greater than or equal to n, then I can break down y into some u, v, and w, such that this v is not epsilon, and v can be pumped as many times as I want. Right? So x, u, v to the power I, w, z belongs to L. So this is the statement of the pumping lemma for regular languages, and we have seen, right, that this particular language, right, which is the 0i 1i, so this language 0i 1i does not actually obey the pumping lemma, right? And you can easily show this by looking at it, right, by basically taking the contrapositive of this pumping lemma. So the slide is not updating. Just give me a second. Okay, right. So we use this particular pumping lemma in its contrapositive form, right? So which means that we say that, okay, if the daemon picks some n, it's any n, then I can take this string 0 and 1n, right, which is in the language, right, and then no matter how, right, the daemon breaks down, right. So basically I have to pick x, y, and z such that the concatenation, right, is 0 and 1, right. So one way to do this is that I pick x equal to epsilon, I pick y equal to 0n, and then I pick z is equal to 1n. So now no matter how the daemon breaks down this y, right, into u, v, and w, v is going to be some 0 to the power some k, right, which means that if you take any I, right, so if you take I equal to 0, or you take I greater than 1, right, then the resulting string x, u, v to the power I, w, z is not going to have the same number of zeros, right, and 1. Right? So in particular, if you take I equal to 0, then the number of zeros in the resulting string will be less than the number of ones. And so therefore the resulting string is not in the language, and therefore the pumping lemma is not satisfied, and hence the language is not regular, right? But now let's apply the pumping lemma for CFLs, right, to the same language. So again, just give me a second, the slide is not updating. Okay, so okay, here it is, right. So again, right, let's revise the statement for the pumping lemma for CFL, right. So it says that if a language L is a CFL, then there exists some n, right, such that if you take every string z whose length is greater than or equal to n, then the z can be broken down into some u, v, w, x, and y, obeying the constraints that the length of vwx is less than or equal to n, the length of vx is greater than 0, and this v and x can be pumped in tandem as many times as I want, right. So if you want to show that this language obeys the pumping lemma, right, then we have to find an n, right, such that the statement of the pumping lemma holds, right. So you can take n equal to 2 here, right? So let's take n equal to 2, right. So now for n equal to 2, right, if you take any string z in L whose length is greater than or equal to 2, right. So which means that so any string, right, so let's say I take the string let's say 0k and 1k, right. So since the length is length should be greater than or equal to 2, it means that k, right, should be greater than or equal to 1, right. So now I can always break down this z, right, into some u, v, w, x, and y, obeying this constraint, right. So what would be one way of breaking down this z, right, this particular string 0k, 1k, right, into u, v, w, x, and y, such that which obeys these two constraints, right, and the resulting string would still be in L, right? So I can basically pump v and x as many times as I want, right? So one way to break this down, right, is I can basically look at I can break down this string, right, as 0 to the power k minus 1, and then 0 1 1 to the power k minus 1, right? And then I can take this to be my vwx. So in particular, I can take v to be 0, I can take x to be 1, and then I can take w to be epsilon, right? So this particular way of breaking down the string, right, does actually obey the constraints, right? So vwx, the length of vwx is 2, so which means it's definitely less than or equal to n. The length of vx is greater than 0, right? And now, right, if I then pump the 0 and 1 in tandem, right, as many times as I want, then the resulting string, right, is still going to have as many zeros as ones, right? So therefore, it will actually be in the language, right? So if you take so the resulting string would be 0 to the power k minus 1, 0 to the power I, 1 to the power I, and 1 to the power k minus 1, right, which is still in L, because it has the same number of zeros as ones. So therefore, this particular language does obey the pumping lemma for CFLs. Right? So of course, this doesn't mean that the language is a CFL. Right? So this is only a necessary condition. Right? It's not a sufficient condition, uh, but this example basically illustrates, right, that the difference between the pumping lemma for regular languages and for CFL. Right? So okay. So are there any questions so far? Okay. So let's try to prove the pumping lemma for CFL. Right? So we won't give a very rigorous and formal proof. So we'll just give an intuitive idea, right, of why this pumping lemma holds. So remember that in order to prove the pumping lemma for regular languages, right? So we relied on the fact that if your language is regular, then there exists a DFA, right, for that language. And then if you take a long enough string, right? So we took n to be the number of states in the DFA, right? And then if you take a string whose length is greater than or equal to n, then the processing that string on the DFA, right? While processing the string on the DFA, you would encounter the same state more than once, right? And in that case, that cycle can basically be looped as many times as you want, right? So, so for in the case of pumping lemma for CFL, right, we will do something similar, right? But so we are going to use the grammar for this language here, right? So if we say that, okay, if the language is a CFL, then there exists a context-free grammar. In particular, there exists a context-free grammar in the Chomsky normal form, right? And we will use this fact, right, that that since there exists a grammar in the Chomsky normal form, if you take a string, right, it will have a derivation in that grammar. And in the derivation, right, some non-terminals are going to be repeated, and you will use this fact, right, in order to prove the pumping lemma. Right? So let's get started. Right? So let's say that we want to show that if L is a CFL, then the pumping lemma holds. Right? So we start with a context-free grammar, right, which is in Chomsky normal form, right? So which is in CNF form for L minus epsilon. So this grammar, let's say, has m variables. Okay, so variables mean non-terminal. So we pick n to be 2 to the power m. Right? So this n is the n of the pumping lemma, right? So which means that we will consider all strings of length greater than or equal to n. Right? So this n is equal to 2 to the power m. Right? So the main observation here, right, is that if you look at Chomsky normal form, right? So what are the constraints in the Chomsky normal form? So every production rule in grammar, right, which is in Chomsky normal form, will be of the form either A generates BC or A generates A. So if you look at the derivation, right, of a string in using these production rules, right, then what do you do at every step of this derivation, right? So at every step of the derivation, right, I can at most double the length of the string, right? So that's why we have picked n equal to 2 to the power m, right? So this will become more clear as we move along. Right? So let's move along. So we pick n to be 2 to the power m, and then let's say we consider a string z whose length is greater than or equal to n. So whose length is greater than or equal to 2 to the power m. Okay. So we will claim that if you have a parse tree, right, so this is, since the z is in the language, which means that it will be derived, right, from the start symbol, from the start non-terminal, and it will have a parse tree. Right? So let's consider the parse tree of this z, right? And we will claim that this parse tree must have a path with at least m plus 2 nodes. So here m is the number of non-terminals in the grammar. So we'll claim that a parse tree with yield z must have a path with at least m plus 2 nodes. So in particular, right, so this is what I was talking about, right? So let's, if you consider the parse tree, right, for a grammar which is in Chomsky normal form, right, then at every step, right, you can at most double, right, the number of the length of the string, right? So basically you will at level 0, right? So let's look at the parse tree. So at level 0 we will just have one node, which is the start non-terminal s. Okay. Now in the next at the next level, right, so there will only be production rules of the form s generates some ab, right? So which means I can have at most 2 nodes at the next level, right? And similarly, from at this level, right, at level number 1, again I can at most double, right, the number of non-terminals that are present in the string. So so which means that because again, right, so this will be a non-terminal, let's say a and b, right? Then again I could use some production rule of the form a generates, let's say, cd or something like that. Okay. So what this means, right, is that if you look at if you draw the parse tree for the string, right, for any string, then at every level, right, the number of nodes can be at most double, right? And remember that at the end, right, we must get the string, right? So which means that the length of this the number of nodes, right, rather at the very last level must be equal to the length of the string. And since I can at most double the number of nodes, right, at every level with every step, right, this means that the length, right, is basically going to pose a constraint on the minimum height, right, or the minimum or the minimum length, right, of the path from the root to the leaf node. So let's consider the parse tree for the string z. It is going to have this form, right, as I have just mentioned in the diagram, right? And at every level of the parse tree, the length, right, which means the number of nodes that are present at that level, can at most double, right? And let's say that we will only use the terminal production rules at the very last level. So in the intermediate levels, we will just use production rules of this form, right? And at the very end, right? So at the very end, right, we will have a string of non-terminals, right? And then we will use the terminal production rules, right? So that the length or the number of nodes remain the same. So as I have just discussed, right, so we can have at most one symbol or one node at level 0, at most 2 at level 1, at most 4 at level 2, and in this way, right, at most 2 to the power I at level number I. Okay. And I know that at the end, right, so we took this length of the string z, right, to be greater than or equal to 2 to the power m, right, where m was the number of non-terminals, right, that are present in the grammar. So this means that in order to get this length of string z, right, this particular length, right, must be this particular length must be at most m, right? So in the sense that only at the level m, right, can I get 2 to the power only at the level m can I get 2 to the power m nodes, right? So therefore this must be level m. So 2 to the power m symbols can only be present at level m or higher, which means that the string itself will be at level m plus 1 or higher, right? So this will be the level m, right? So I'll have 2 to the power m nodes. And then once I have 2 to the power m nodes, then I can use the terminal production rules, right? So therefore, the string itself, right, is going to be present at this level, right? And so that will be at the level m plus 1. Which means that if you look at the number of nodes that are present, right, from the root node, in number of nodes that are present on a path from the root node to the leaf node, then you're going to have m plus 2 such nodes. Right? So the parse tree must have a path of length at least m plus 2 or more. Okay? In particular, right, the number of non-terminals that are going to be present on this path is going to be at least m plus 1, right? So we will have at least m plus 1 non-terminals on this path from the root node to the leaf nodes. Right? So we know that the parse tree for Z has a path with at least m plus 1 non-terminals, but since there are only m non-terminals in the grammar, right? So this means that some particular non-terminal is going to be repeated, right, in this parse tree. So if we consider some longest path, right, then since there are only m different non-terminals, so this means that among the lowest m plus 1 non-terminals, right, we can find 2 nodes which have the same label. So let's say A, right? So among the lowest, so we consider the longest path, right, from the root node to one of the leaf nodes. So we know that this length is going to be at least m plus 2, and it's going to have at least m plus 1 non-terminals. So I consider the lowest m plus 1 nodes, right, on this path. Then since there are only m non-terminals, this means that some non-terminal is going to be repeated, right, on this path. So this is the diagrammatic representation, right? So I consider this longest path, right? So this is the root node, right? And this is the string itself. So at the end I have the string, and I consider this longest path, right, from the root node to one of the leaf nodes. So I know that some particular non-terminal is going to be repeated on this path, right? So let's say A is repeated on this particular path. So I consider the string that I derived from A, right? So this W, right, is the string that I have derived from the lower non-terminal A. So I know that so since A is present on the path, right, and at the end A is not present, right, which means that I must have derived some string, right, from A. Right? So somehow I would have gotten rid of that A, right? And therefore I get this particular string W, which I have derived from A. Right? And let's assume that from the higher A, right, which means from this particular A, I derived the string VWX, right? So I know that since from the A that is present higher up on the path, right, I derived the A that was present lower on the path, right? So this means that whatever I derived from the lower A, which is W, must be part of the string that I derived from the higher A. Right? So that's why the string that I derived from the higher A would be of the form VWX. Okay. So now, right, from this diagram, right, it's now very easy to see how the pumping lemma, right, how the statement of the pumping lemma is constructed, right? So and obviously, right, so since we have removed epsilon, so remember that we have removed epsilon from the language. So this means that both this V and X, right, cannot be epsilon. So now, right, what I can do, right, is that I can basically substitute the lower A for the higher A, right? So which means that so I know that A is derived from S, right? And from A I derived the string VWX, right? But instead I can basically move this particular A, this particular derivation here, right? So that's exactly what I'm doing in this diagram, right? So I have basically substituted the lower A for the higher A. So we need to saying that W also cannot be epsilon, right? Yeah. So in this case, it is true, right, that the W also cannot be epsilon. Yeah, that's correct. but it's not. I mean, it's not really useful for us, right, to use that, right? In the sense that since we are going to pump v and x, right, so it doesn't matter if w is epsilon or not, right? But we definitely want v and x both to be not epsilon, right? Because if they are both epsilon, then pumping won't really generate more strings, right? So that's why we don't really care about w. But yeah. So this means that if I can substitute the lower a, right, for the higher a, right, then the resulting string that I get, right, is this u, w, and y, right? So u and y are still present, right? So u and y was whatever I derived from s, right? Uh, but which did not include this substring that was derived from the higher a. Right? So from the higher a, I derived v, w, x, and everything else, right, that are derived from s, I have denoted by u and y, right? And since I have substituted the lower a for the higher a, right? So v and x are gone now, and I only have u, w, y, right? So this is the same as u v to the power 0, w x to the power 0, and y. So so this particular parse tree, this is also a valid parse tree, right? Which means that this particular string v, u, w, y can also be derived from the start symbol s, right? Which means that u, w, y should also be in the language, right? And then so here I have substituted the lower a for the higher a, right? But I can also do the other way around, right? So I can substitute the higher a, right, for the lower a. So that's what I'm doing here, right? So this particular a, right, and in particular this derivation aw, right, uh, I basically again used this derivation a to vwx, right, in place of the a to w derivation, right? So in that case, right, what will be the resulting string, right? So since I have substituted the lower a for the higher a, right? So in place of the lower a to w derivation, I've used the higher a to vwx derivation, right? So which means I will have two copies of v and I will have two copies of x, right? And this w is still present, right? So that the resulting string will be u v square w x square y, right? And again I can do the same thing, right? So again, so this is, first of all, so this is again a valid parse tree, right? So which means that this is another valid derivation of the string u v square w x square y, and therefore it should be in the language, right? And again I can substitute uh, the higher a, right, for the lower a, right? So this particular a can again be substituted, so in which case I will get three copies of v and x, right? And so on, right? So which means that this u v to the power I, w x to the power I, y for any I should also be in the language, right? So this is sort of an informal explanation, right, of the pumping lemma, right, and why it holds. So any questions regarding this proof? Right. So let's also sort of illustrate this proof, right, using the same example, right? So this is the 0 and 1 and example. So we have seen this grammar, right, for 0 and 1 n. So first of all, we saw a grammar which is very simple, right? So it's the 0s1 grammar, right? And then we also converted Chomsky normal form, right? So the grammar for 0 and 1 n in Chomsky normal form is as shown in the slide, right? So we have s generates a0 or r, and then s generates a0 a1, r generates sa1, then a0 generates 0, and a1 generates 1. Okay. Now, if you consider the parse tree of the string 0, 0, 0, and 1, 1, 1, right? So this is the parse tree of the string 0, 0, 0, and 1, 1, 1. Right? So if you look at the leaf nodes, right? So at the leaf nodes, I have 0, 0, 0, and 1, 1, 1. And this is the only parse tree, in fact, that you can generate for this particular string. Okay. Now, if I consider a path, right? So let's say I consider this path, right? Say I can consider any path, right? But if you consider this path, right, then you can see that S, right, is repeated multiple times on this path. So in particular, right, so what I can do, right, is that I can basically consider this as, right, and this as, right, and if you consider this as and this as, right, then so now what is u, v, w, x, and y here, right? So this is so since I'm considering this s, right, to be the higher s, right? So this s that I have denoted by an arrow to be the higher s, right? So which means that, so this is going to be u, this is going to be y, right? And then and this is going to be w, and this is going to be v, and this is going to be x, right? So u is 0, v is 0, w is 0, 1, x is 1, and y is 1, right? And now I can I can basically illustrate whatever I did with the pumping lemma, whatever I did with the proof of the pumping lemma, right? So I can basically replace the lower s, right, with the upper s, right? So in which case I will get u, w, and y, which will be the string 0, 0, 1, 1. Right, or I can replace the lower s with the higher s, right? So in which case I will get 2 copies of v and x. Right? So and I can do this as many times as I want in order to pump as many copies of v and x as I want, right? And the resulting parse trees, right, will still be valid parse trees in the sense that the resulting strings will still be in the language. Yeah. So therefore, this 0, 0 to the power I, 0, 1, 1 to the power I, 1 is still going to be in the language. And in fact, you can see that the resulting strings still have the same number of zeros and ones. So I hope that this basically clarifies the sort of cryptic statement, right, of the pumping lemma, right? And why is it that we need to pump 2 strings in tandem? So this is not random, right? So this v and x are sort of are not random strings, right? So they can be constructed, right, from the grammar of the CFL in its Chomsky normal form. And remember that we also had this other constraint, right, that the length of VWX should be less than or equal to n, right? And so that is because we have considered on this longest path, right, from the root node to the leaf nodes, we have considered the lowest m+1 nodes, right? So since we have considered the lowest m+1 nodes, right, which means that the length, right, is basically m+1. Therefore, the total number of strings or the total the length of the string that I can derive from this upper A, right, is going to be at most 2 to the power m, which we saw is equal to n. Right? So that's why we have this constraint: the length of VWX is less than or equal to n, right? Because the length of this path, right, is basically m+1, which means that there are only m levels on this so in this particular tree, right, there are only m levels, which means that at the end I can have the length at most m+1. So Vineet is asking, why is that a constraint? We can prove without it as well. So I'm assuming you mean this VWX is less than or equal to n. So yeah, so that constraint is important, right? Because whenever we use the pumping lemma, right, in its contrapositive form, right, we will actually use this constraint VWX is less than or equal to n extensively, right? So that's why that constraint is important, right? And in fact, it directly follows, right, from the proof of the pumping lemma, right? In the sense that the pumping lemma holds, right, because if you take a large enough string, right, then its parse tree is going to have this specific structure, right? And the substrings that you pump, right, v and x, right, they are part of this particular string VWX, whose length can be at most n. Right? So we will use this particular constraint many times in the contrapositive, and it directly follows from the proof as well. Okay. Okay, so let's look at the contrapositive now of the CFL pumping lemma, right? So this is what we will use to prove that some language is not a CFL. So again, so this is the contrapositive. So we say that if you take some language L, right, then if for every integer n, there exists a string z in L whose length is greater than or equal to n, such that for any way in which you can break down the string z, right? So for all uv, w, and x, uv, w, x, and y equal to z, which follows the constraint that the length of vwx is less than or equal to n, and the length of vx is greater than 0, there exists some I, right, which is greater than or equal to 0, such that u v to the power I, w x to the power I, y is not in L. So if this holds, then the language L is not a CFL. So if so you take any arbitrary language L, and if for every integer n, right, I can always find a string z in L whose length is greater than or equal to n, right? And no matter how I break down this string z into u, v, w, x, and y, right, following the constraint that vwx is less than or equal to n, the length of vwx is less than or equal to n, and the length of vx is greater than 0, I can always find an I which is greater than or equal to 0, such that if I pump v and x in tandem, right, u v to the power I, w x to the power I, y, then the resulting string is not in L. Right? So if I can show this for every n, then the language L is not a CFL. Right? So again, right, so this is directly taking the contrapositive, right, of the pumping lemma for CFL. Right? So we haven't done anything extraordinary here, right? So I can, so again, this has a very complex structure, right? So there is a, so for example, there is a for all quantifier here, and then there is an existential quantifier here, and then there's a for all quantifier here, and there's an existential here, right? So again, I can basically convert this contrapositive, right, into a game, which makes it easier to use. So let's look at okay, so again, the slide is not updating. So in the so while the slide updates, right, I can we can directly see, right, that how this particular statement can be converted into a game. Right? So every universal quantifier, right, is basically going to become so we are going to play this game with the daemon, right, and every statement that is quantified by universal quantifier is going to be a step of the daemon, and every step that is quantified by an existential quantifier is going to be a step that the player, right, that we are going to make. So which means that so we're given some language L, right, and we want to show that this language is not a CFL. Right? So the game starts with the daemon. So the daemon is going to pick the integer n. Right? Okay. So I'm sorry, I lost the connection again. So right. So this is what I was saying, right? So there is this nesting of for all and there exists quantifiers, right? So that's why in order to make this slightly easier, we can formulate this as a game with the daemon, right? And as I said, right, every universal quantifier is going to be a step or a step of the daemon, right? And every existential quantifier is a step of the player. Right? So the daemon picks n, and then I pick the player, right, picks a z such that z belongs to L, and the length of z is greater than or equal to n. And then the daemon is going to pick some uv, w, x, and y such that z is equal to the concatenation of these substrings, and the constraints that vx is greater than 0, the length of vx is greater than 0, and the length of vwx is less than or equal to n. And then I am going to pick some I, right, such that so when will I win, right? So I win this game if I pick an I such that u v to the power I w x to the power I y is not in L, right? So if I pump v and x in tandem I times, then the resulting string that I get is not in L, right? And if I have a winning strategy, right, which means that no matter what the daemon picks, so no matter what the daemon picks in step numbers 1 and 3, uh, L is not a CFL if I have a winning strategy. Okay, so now I have lost the other connection. So just give me a minute again. Right. So let's illustrate the use of the pumping lemma. So we'll do 3 examples, right? So let's do this slightly faster, right? So let's consider this language, right? 0 to the power I, 1, 0 to the power I. Right? So this language is a CFL. So we can always match one pair of counts, right? But we cannot match 2 pairs of counts, right? So which means that this language 0 to the power I, 1, 0 to the power I, 1, 0 to the power I, right? So where I have these 3 different substrings, right, which have the same number of zeros. So this particular language is not a CFL, right? So we can't match 2 pairs or 3 counts as a group, right? And we will show this using the pumping lemma, right? So again, so let's do this, right? So in the first step, daemon picks some n. Right? So now I have to pick a string z whose length is greater than or equal to n. And this is the string that I pick, right? So I pick 0 to the power n, 1, 0 to the power n, 1, 0 to the power n. Right? So this string is in L and its length is clearly greater than n, right? So therefore it's fine. Okay. So now the daemon is going to pick some uv, w, x, and y, right? Such that it obeys the constraints, right? So the daemon picks uv, w, x, and y obeying the constraints, right? So now I have to pick an I, right? Such that if I pump v and x in tandem, then I number of times, then the resulting substring is not going to be in L, right? So let's see, right? So what can I do, right? So what can I say about this uv, w, x, and y that the daemon has picked, right? So let's case split here, right? So let's first consider the case where this vx, right, has no zeros. So it is possible that the daemon has picked this uv, w, x, and y such that vx has no zeros, right? But in that case, my life is very simple, right? So if vx has no zeros, right, which means that then since the length of vx is greater than 0, there must be at least one 1, right, in this vx. Right? So which means that if I take this resulting string u, w, and y, right, so this string, right, is going to have at most 1 1, right? So because there is at least one 1 in v and x, right? And which means if I pump down, right? So if I remove this v and x, then this resulting string is going to have at most 1 1, and no string in L. If you look at every string in L, right? Every string in L has exactly 2 1s, right? So which means that if I take I equal to 0, then the resulting string is not going to be in the language, right? So in which case I will win. And the second case is that Vx has at least 1 0, right? So in the first case, we consider the case where Vx has no zeros, right? In which case it will have 1 1, and therefore I could do the proof, right? So now let's consider the case where Vx has at least 1 0, right? So now if you look at this string, right, 0 to the power n, 1 0 to the power n, 1 0 to the power n, then since the length of Vwx, right, is less than or equal to n, and Vx contains at least 1 0, it's definitely not going to be the case that this Vwx is going to span 2 blocks of zeros, right? Because the length is less than or equal to n, right? And I have contiguous blocks of n zeros, right? So which is separated by a 1, right? So which means that this Vwx is going to span is definitely not going to span all 3 blocks of zeros, right? So in fact, so it is possible that it may span 2 blocks, right, because I could start somewhere in the middle, let's say of the first block, right? And then I could end up somewhere in the middle of the next block. But in order to span all three blocks, right, it's not possible to do that with a string of length less than or equal to n, right? So therefore, this VWX is basically too short, right, to extend to all the three blocks of zeros. Right? So at most 2 blocks of zeros may be covered by VWX, right? But not all the 3 blocks, right? But then that's again in my favor, right? Because in which case, what I will do, right, is that I will again pump down, right? So I will take I equal to 0. So if I take this string uwy, then this resulting string, right, is going to have at least one block of n zeros, right? Because this is the one block of n zeros, let's say this one, which we have not touched at all, right? Which is this VWX is not even touching, right? So this one block of n zeros is going to be present, and the remaining 2 blocks, right, at least one of them is going to have fewer than n zeros, right? Because Vx is the length of Vx is greater than 0, right? So I would have removed at least 1 0, and I remember I have assumed that Vx is at least 1 0, right? So which means that again, right, so I have one block with n zeros, and I have one block, at least one block, which has less than n zeros. So therefore the resulting string is again not in the language, right? So I can pick I equal to 0, so which means that no matter what the daemon picks, right, I have a winning strategy. I can always pick I equal to 0, and the resulting string won't be in the language. So that's why this particular language is not a CFL, right? Okay, so so are there any questions regarding this example? So in general, this is the way in which you have to use this pumping lemma, right? So it's slightly more difficult to use than the pumping lemma for regular languages, in that you will have to consider different cases, right? For this, depending on the choice of the daemon, right? So in fact, you may have to pick different eyes as well, right? So that's what this particular example illustrates, right? So let's consider this language, right? So this is the language a to the power I, b to the power j, and c to the power k, where we have this constraint, right, that I is less than or equal to j is less than or equal to k, right? And we have to show that this language is not a CFL, right? So again, we will use the pumping lemma to show this, right? So let's do this, right? So let's say that the daemon picks some n, right? So I'm going to pick the string a and b and c n. So this string is clearly in the language, right? Because I is clearly less than or equal to j is less than or equal to k. So therefore it's in the language, and its length is also greater than or equal to n. So we are fine here, right? So let's say that the daemon picks u, v, w, x, and y, which is equal to a and b and c, and such that the length of vwx is less than or equal to n, and the length of vx is greater than 0. So again, I use this fact that the length of vwx, right, is less than or equal to n, right? So this vwx is going to be somewhere in this string, right? In the string a and b and c n, but it is not going to span all the 3 of a, b, and c, right? So in order to span all the 3, so if this vwx were to contain all the 3 of a, b, and c, then its length must be greater than n, right? But that is not the case, right? So the length of vwx is less than or equal to n. Therefore, it's not going to contain all of a, b, and c, right? So one of a, b, or c will be missing in this in vwx, right? So we will case split based on which symbol is not present. So let's consider the case where a is not present in vwx, right? So again, right, I have a and b and c n, right, which is equal to u, v, w, x, and y, and this vwx, right, does not contain a, right? So we have just shown that this vwx cannot contain all the 3 symbols, and we have considered the case where vwx does not contain a. So now what can we say about this vwx, right? So which means that so since this vwx, right, is not does not contain a, right, let's say that I basically pump down, right? So this vwx, right, is going to contain b's and c's. It may contain b or it may contain c, right? But the length of vx must be greater than 0, right? Which means that if I pump down, right, so if I consider the string u, w, and y, right? So I consider v and x, right? So I pump down v and x to 0, right? Then this resulting string is still going to have n number of a's, right? But it's definitely going to have fewer number of b's or c's, right? It cannot have n number of b's and n number of c's, right? So which means that the string uwy contains more a, right? But remember that our language was that ai bj ck, right? Where I is less than or equal to j is less than or equal to k, right? But here in this particular string uwy, right, the number of a's are now more than the number of b's or the number of c's. So that's why the string uwy is not in the language, and hence we can pick I equal to 0. So let's consider the second case, right, where b is not present in vwx. So again, I have a and b and cn equal to u, v, w, x, and y, such that b is not present in vwx, right? So now what can we say about this vwx, right? So this vwx can either contain a or it can contain c, right? Again, it cannot contain both of them, right? Because b is also not present, right? So again, we'll case split based on whether it contains a or it contains c. So vwx contains either all a or all or c's, right? So let's say it only contains a's. Okay. So now if vwx only contains a's, right, then what can I do, right? So what is the value of I that I can pick so that the resulting string won't be in the language? Yeah. So when it is saying pump up, right? So that's correct, right? So if we pick I equal to 2, right? So here I can't pick I equal to 0, right? Because if I pick I equal to 0, so I already have n b's, right? I cannot touch the n b's here, right? And vwx only contains a, which means that vx only contains a's, right? So if I pump down, right, then I'm only decreasing the number of a's, which is not really useful to me, right? Because that string will still be in the language, right? But if I pump up, so I already have n a's. If I pump up, then I'm going to have more number of a's, right? So which means that the resulting string won't be in the language, right? So contains only a's, then I pump up, so I pick I equal to 2. So the resulting string u v square w x square y contains more a's, right? So hence we pick I equal to 2. So now let's consider the other case where vwx only contains c's. Okay, so if vwx only contains c's, then what can I do, right? Yeah, so pump down, that's correct, right? So since vwx only contains c's, vx only contains c's. So if I pump up, right, then it's not really useful, right? Because I will only increase the number of c's, but then the resulting string, right, is still in the language, right? But if I pump down, right, then I still have n b's, but if I pump down, then I will have less than n c's, right, which will not be in the language. So if it contains only c's, then uwy contains fewer c's, and that's why we pick I equal to 0. And let's consider the last case, right? So this is very easy, right? So let's say that c is not present in vwx, right? So again, I have a and b and cn is equal to u, v, w, x, and y, such that this vwx, right, only spans a's and b's, right? So c is not present in the language. Okay. So now what can I do, right? Should I pump up or should I pump down? Yeah, so pump up. Yeah, that's correct, right? So since vwx spans a's and b's, right? So it may contain a or it may contain b or it may contain both. But no matter, right? Vx, its length will be greater than 0. So if I pump up, right, then the resulting string is going to have either more than n a's or more than n b's, right? Or maybe both. Right? But in any case, right, it will still have n c's, right? So therefore, the resulting string will not be in the language, right? So the string u v square w x square y contains more a or b's than c. So that's why it will not be in the language. So I pick I equal to 2, right? So this is where this pumping lemma for CFS slightly differs from the pumping lemma for regular languages, right? Since that we never came across a case, right, where we had to pick multiple this pumping lengths, right, this pumping factor in the case of pumping lemma for regular languages. But in this case, we may have to pick different different i's, right, for the different cases. Okay, so I'm out of time, so I'm going to stop the lecture today, and so tomorrow is the test, and we'll continue on Monday. So thank you, everyone. No, so the pumping lemma is not part of the syllabus. So as I said, right, everything that's covered in this week is not part of the test. Okay.